and this is actually the most modern form of the pu'er. It's being pressed into a small single-use serving, but it's a lot easier than traditionally coming in massive bricks and taking individual slices out of that. So the honey, Shu, the green pu'er right with you guys, and Bob and Claudia, you guys have the 2012 Jingmai green pu'er. So everyone that is kind of, maybe make yourself the captain of the water or something. So this is the water, and somebody be the captain of it. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your tea, and so there's dry tea in here, there's about 9 grams or so. What you do with your tea is add the hot water, so it's boiling water, and make sure it's open. And this is called the wash. So I'm washing the tea. So pu'er is, it basically gets put into a big pile, and there's a lot of microbes and organisms that are basically processing the tea in the damp tea water. So what this first wash does is it kind of just gets all that out of there, and it's been transported and touched by a lot of people, so just kind of wash it off. So I'm gonna dump it in here. Perfect, perfect. Keep going, and then we're gonna do it for 30 seconds. So this is the Gong Fu method. And so this last one, the Jingmai, which Bob and Claudia have, and I encourage you guys to all get up and take your cup with you and then go try all the different types of tea. And so we'll go through a couple different tastings of it. So this first tasting, and we'll do another tasting, and you'll gradually taste the different, 30 seconds? All right, perfect. So now take your tea.
All pu'er starts with making what you call matcha, and that is fire roasted, pan roasted, and rolled, and then it's sun dried. And then from there, you can either make it into sheng or shu pu'er. And sheng is just packed and either so loose or in cakes, and it's aged naturally. So after
about
years.
45 days. Well,
no,
so,
that's a shoe.
Yeah. No, so yeah, it keeps oxidizing over time.
So it changes flavor.
Yeah.
And keeps evolving. So if you drink it right away, it's like fresh flavor, flowery, slightly smoky. After 3 years, it starts developing fruity notes. After 5 years, it's dried fruit or honey. And after 10 years, umami, dates, woods, rain on the forest floor. So
interesting.
The sheng pu'er evolves, and then there's the shu pu'er, which is artificially fermented, and it's wet piling. So you pile the matcha in big piles, you add moisture, you cover it, and you leave it to ferment for 45 days.
When you store pu'er, you're storing it, you don't want to seal it, because if you seal it, then you've blocked off it for it to continue to ferment and age and oxidize. So if I put it in here, so this, we keep them sealed because you kind of have to keep them sealed. But if this was a really valuable, and it is valuable, there's a lot of, it takes a lot to get to this. But if I were keeping this at my house, I would probably just keep it cracked like that, and I'd keep it in a damp spot, or not a damp spot. I'd keep it in a cool, dry spot out of the sun, and it's going to continue to oxidize like wine would. Not necessarily oxidize, but it's going to continue to age, and the flavors will continue to change. And what gives it all this flavor and what makes it so unique is that Yunnan, the province that it comes from, that it was drawn out of, it's one of the most diverse, minerally diverse provinces in China. So all those minerals are contributing to the flavor of the tea. They're being drawn up. And so different mountain ranges are going to have different characteristics of flavor, basically.
They make dark tea all over China, but to be called pu'er, it has to be grown in Yunnan.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's all types of dark tea, but it only qualifies for pu'er tea if it's come from the Yunnan Province. And so the place that we get our tea it's Jingmai Mountain, and it's a huge mountain, and the tea farm is on the top of it. So you drive from the bottom and then go straight up to the top. And there's a village up there. There's people that live there. So all the people that pick the tea, they live right there. There's villages, and it's I've been there. It's all dirt roads. There's no paved roads. There's no sidewalks. You're out there. You're in the jungle. It's really cool. So these tea leaves that pu'er is coming from is from Assamica. So there's different types of tea, Camellia chinensis. There's different types and variations of the plant. And so this leaf happens to be a very large leaf. And it is then gone through the process that Ganoa was talking about. And it is pressed into cakes. Now, it wasn't always traditionally pressed into cakes. It was pressed into cakes originally because of transportation. So it was a lot harder to move a bunch of loose leaf tea versus putting it into a cake, and then you put those cakes. And you were saying 7 cakes go through.
So there is traditionally 357 gram in a bing, which is the round cake shape, the most traditional form of pu'er. And that is 7 liang, which is a Chinese measurement. And then you stack 7 of these into a tong, which is also a Chinese measurement. And then you take 12 of the tongs and put in a basket, and that's around 30 kilos. And then you pack 2 baskets on a mule and transported that on the horse tea trade road. What's it called?
Horse trade, yeah.
Horse road. So even though it seems very random, the 357 grams, it's very precisely measured to be exactly what a mule can carry.
In about the 7th century, the monks discovered tea, basically. They had tea brought to them, and they discovered all of the medicinal uses for it, and that one, it had caffeine, so it'd give them energy, and 2, they just noticed that it just had a ton of benefits to it. And so they started trading with China their horses, Tibetan horses, for the pu'er. And so China wanted to build its army, so they got a lot of horses, and in trade, all the monks in Tibet got a lot of tea from Yunnan Province. And so from Kunming, which is kind of the capital of Yunnan, they created, there's trails that go from China into Tibet. And there's, multiple trails. And it's about 4,000 kilometers long. And you would do it in caravans of horses and people walking it. And it was treacherous, and they would take these huge caravans across it with the tea. And so the tea is aging and fermenting as it's on the trail. And so a lot of the flavor that is almost like that isn't even existent today is that this tea was in contact, so it's kind of funny, but it was in contact with the horses. And the horses are working for 4,000 miles, so they're building up a lot of sweat, and so that flavor is actually being put into the tea. It's being absorbed by the environment that it's around. So it wasn't just from minerals that were in the ground. It was from what it was almost directly in contact with. And it's interesting that we seek these flavors too. Some of these teas, it's a very earthy. It should be very earthy. You should almost be able to taste that it's like, am I drinking something that was like damp? It should kind of taste like it was dampened, and it does. And so when you were talking about the first style of tea, which is the Shang, it wouldn't even become to the flavor they wanted until like 10 years. So this is still 3 years away from getting that actual
matured.
But it's still something we can enjoy right now and stuff, and we can still taste it. What started it was China's want for horses and their want for the tea. And actually, so when Mao became president, or not president, he was a dictator, I guess. Chairman. There you go. That's the politically correct word. He discouraged people from purchasing these teas that were very old because it was a luxury, and I don't necessarily know his ideology, but you weren't necessarily supposed to indulge in those like extras kind of. And then after that, and so during that time, he actually instituted, and so this was in the 1950s, he closed a ton of factories and made very specific factories, and these factories were the factories that were producing the highest quality of tea. And so there was 4 factories, and they were, I think 2 of them were Yunnan and maybe 2 of them were somewhere else, but they were the highest quality and they were producing the most consistent tea. In Yunnan, they're tea trees, which is different than a tea bush. So if you go to India, Taiwan, a lot of other places that grow tea, they're all going to be tea bushes. So in Colombia, and so they're going to be, it's all man-made, it looks very manufactured and manicured, and everything's in nice rows and stuff. So, but in the tea forest, on the top of this mountain in Yunnan, it's a tea forest. And so they're massive trees that are producing tea for everyone, basically. And it's different because, like I said, it's an Assamica, so it's a larger leaf. So it's a different variation of the Camellia canadensis. And it is, so these trees are about 800 to 1,000 years old. So, I mean, there's obviously different variations of ideas about how tea should be made. And yeah, it's all very cool. So and then another thing about this tea farm, the tea masters are not Chinese, they are Taiwanese. So it's a Taiwanese family that owns it, and they've actually been asked by the Chinese government to basically produce tea because they've done such a great job. So this Taiwanese family, they have another tea farm in Taiwan, and so they produce oolong there. And they were such good tea masters that they've been asked by the government to come manage this land, basically. So the ancient tea farm, and it's on a World Heritage Site. It's very heavily protected, and yeah, it's very interesting, just that they would ask. I mean, not that they can ask that, but it's just a very funny situation that is in place of a Taiwanese family coming and taking care of it. But yeah, it's all very interesting. And Yunnan Province has it's about 25 different ethnic, it's very diverse ethnic tribes, or yeah, exactly. And it's the most diverse in China. So it's very cool. And I mean, it's the most diverse in almost every single category as far as plants, animals, humans, minerals. It's really interesting. So does anybody notice very distinct flavors in the tea? I mean, like I said earlier, it's very earthy, so it's a darker tea. But in the green tea, it's going to be a lot lighter. So Puerh has a lot of health benefits. It has a lot of microbes in it, so it's really good for your stomach, which I was saying earlier. So it's very good gut health. It helps lower cholesterol. It is, I had a piece of paper somewhere. Am I missing something? It's very good for your stomach, your gut health, and just processing food and breaking down food and making sure you get the right energy out of stuff. So like people in Tibet, they didn't have access to a lot of vegetables and fruits and stuff. But I mean, some people think it's super gross and some people love it. So if you're Tibetan, you probably love it. I mean, I've never had it, but it doesn't sound appealing. But I'm sure it has its own characters. But they also use it because of the landscape that they're in. There's not a lot out there already. And so they're really trying to maximize what they're drinking. So they're putting all this stuff in here to get as much energy out of it as they can. So they use it as a meal almost. And they were saying like they put barley in it and whatnot. Oh, so shu can have up to 300 to 600, or 300 plus fungi, so living organisms in it, and then about 600 plus bacteria. And so that doesn't sound appealing, but it's actually really good for your gut, because your gut can attack that and process it, and it can basically, you're priming your stomach for that. And so the reason that we did a wash at the beginning is because sometimes this tea can have, like I said, it has a lot of microbes, it has a lot of bacteria in it. You're kind of washing a little bit out of the way, because not everyone is attuned to all those at once. While they are good for you, not everyone is like, oh yeah, like give them to me, it's like coughing in your face or something. Like you don't necessarily want it immediately, but like you kind of can't avoid it. So you just wash that first one just to kind of get it out of the way and just kind of clean the tea a little bit. And if you're sensitive to caffeine, you can do it to other teas too. It'll kind of wash that caffeine. It's a very broad term, wash it away, but you're kind of priming it a little bit and you're just getting rid of it. And it kind of just opens up the tea. So like those tushas, these little guys, you kind of just want to open it up a little bit because it's all pressed, it's very caked, and yeah, you want to enjoy it. You want the tea leaf to expand. So if you ever come in here and you've asked me if you suggest these over like a tea ball, I'm always going to say these because they allow the tea leaf to open up. And if you're drinking whole leaf tea, oolongs, pu'ers, you want that leaf to expand. So like this is a green tea, it's the How Mountain, and you want those tea leaves to open up and to get the full flavor out of them. You see right there, the tea leaves, it's all pressed into a cake. So if we wanted to, we could get a pu'er knife, and I would just start kind of carving it a little bit. And they press, so this is a little bit different. It's not your traditional like flattened brick or a cake of it. And so they're pressed so that the tea leaves are layered. So you don't want to just go from the top and start digging and trying to pull it out. If you see, it's all very layered. So you want to break those layers off and just use a little bit. Yunnan's not massive as far as like square mileage as compared to other provinces, but it has to be from this region. And there's usually, it's in a range of like as far as elevation goes. So I think it's like 800 to 1,000 or 1,200 meters. It's in that you kind of have to qualify for your tea. You can still produce tea, but it just might not be called actual pu'er. Yeah, and so I mean the way that they did come to pu'er is that they were transporting it and it aged and fermented, and then by the time they got to where they were going, it had become a dark tea. So it had left being a different tea, and I think a green tea, and by the time it got to where it was going, it had become a black to dark pu'er tea basically. And so it was not intentional, but it's just oxidation. That's what happens. Like people oxidize. Everything oxidizes. This tea will oxidize, and everything. It was an accident, I guess, kind of.
Yeah. Then the horse sweat helped.
And the horse sweat, yeah. You can't forget that little bit of saltiness. And so all these flavors, I mean, like the honey pu'er, there's not actual being honey put into it. It's the way that the process has come about that it has a sweeter note to it and that it has a honey essence to it. So there's actually a board of people that govern what is pu'er and what is not pu'er, and they're making sure that it comes from where they say it comes, because
there's tons of counterfeit.
Exactly. So somebody might just want to say pu'er tea from Yunnan, and if there's no one there to police it, then they're just going to be sending out tea that is not actually what it is. And so there's a board that regulates all this, and yeah, I mean it's a serious thing. Like people spend millions of dollars on tea. I think I just saw it was like 2,000 grams, and it was from early 1900s, so it's very old, about 100 plus years old. Yeah, so about 2,000 grams from the 1900s, sold for $1.7 million, 1.7 US dollars, which is a lot of money for tea. But it's also something that people value, and they see that they want it to continue to change, and yeah, it's just it's really amazing. It's really cool. And then it ends up here in our store, and we all get to enjoy it and taste it and see what we like. People often don't like green teas because they're using water that is too hot. Exactly, you're burning it. And it gets that bitter flavor. But with this, it's just a very easy tea to brew. Very forgiving, yeah, exactly. If you've grown up in a tea drinking world, if you've grown up in some Southwest Asia or Asia in general, if you've traveled there, you've probably come across it. But the average person is not going to know a ton about pu'er, just because there's not a whole lot of information about pu'er. I mean, there's other things to research basically. Not everyone's wanting to jump on tea and research tea, so that's just kind of the reality of it. Good pu'er is not cheap. So, but I mean, this pu'er, so like 30 grams for $7. That's a pretty good price, and it's a really nice tea. And you can get a lot out of it. So this is something that you don't just steep once, you're steeping it multiple times. And I mean, when we were there, one of our hosts, he is very into oolong. So he is an oolong connoisseur. He would purchase really expensive oolongs, and not necessarily older, but just the way that they process and certain farms that they've come from. So he's very into that. And he's into pu'ers too. And he will drink one of them and he'll have them for like a week. And he'll be drinking the same one for a very long time. And he sits down and he like analyzes the tea. And I mean, he has a job, he does all these other things, but he takes time out of his day to like make a cup of tea that has been sitting there for a long time. And he's like in his head analyzing the tea flavors and stuff and how it's changed. And yeah, so I mean, you can really dive into it like somebody might dive into wine, and they might really love wine and certain aspects of it or certain flavors. And yeah, it's very technical. And at the same time, it's not very technical. All the work that Gunnar was talking about, the pan frying, putting it in piles, I mean, that's all done by hand. It's all done by people, by hand. So there's not necessarily machines. I mean, they have newer machines to press it, but a lot of the work is all done by hand. And I'm sure to a degree that plays a role in its flavor and in everything about it. I mean, it's all very connected. No one part is by itself. It's all very important to end up with a quality product. And so another thing I was going to mention is that, so like they do traditionally come in those, but there's a newer form, and it's called brick tea, and it comes in a brick, and it's very cheap tea, but it's still pu'er tea. It's a dark tea, and it's very dark. Like visually it's dark, and the flavor is very earthy and musty. And for some people that's delicious. Like, and I actually kind of like that. Like the sticky rice pu'er, I'll pass it around so you guys can smell. If anybody ever comes in talking about or asking for pu'er, I always tell them this one. And the sticky rice is actually that smell is actually so it's not actually rice that they're putting it in. You have it at home? Yeah, I mean, I love this tea. Yeah. So it smells like rice, but they're not using rice. Oh, it's the process that it's being processed by.
Yeah, I've had these before.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are delicious.
If anybody wants to read an excellent little novel about pu'er teas, this is really, really good.
What's it
about
called? Oh,
Tea Girl from Hummingbird Lane.
That is my ophthalmologist.
Yeah,
pu'er.
but it is really good. She doesn't even know about pu'er tea. It's a secret from her mom, like a secret they keep in the women's side of the family.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, just a whole story about her life and the pu'er, which is yeah.
I mean, yeah, tea is a very connecting. I mean, we're all connected right now through drinking tea. So I mean, it brings people together. Well, I think that kind of might be wrapping it up unless anybody else has any other questions or comments, anything to add. Otherwise, I just encourage you to keep trying the tea if you'd like. Yeah, I think that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for coming down and enjoying tea with us. Yeah, of course. Hope everything tasted okay.
Yeah, I think the shoe's my favorite.
The shoe's your favorite? Yeah.